Well, welcome to the August edition of Plants Pest Pathogens. I'm Matt Bertone. I will be leading the session today. We have Dr. Barbara Shu here too, and some speakers, and hope you enjoy the session today. Okay, so just a little introduction on what to do. Here's the setup for what you should be seeing on your screen. Basically, over here, right on this this little strip, is your toolbar for using different tools. This one with the little sun is a nice little symbol to use. You can stamp it on the window, on the image, or if you hold it down, it'll actually show it until you let go, and it'll stamp it or let go off the screen. If we ask for any text or any writing, there is a writing text box right here. And otherwise, if you have any questions, just let us know through the chat box, which is down here. If you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box. We ask that you leave your microphone off if you're not speaking. When time comes for questions, if you'd like to turn it on and ask, you can also use the little raise your hand here to signify that you'd like to ask a question. Otherwise, let us know if you have any questions, other questions, and we'll get started. So first, as we normally do, if you'd like, just use one of the symbols and stamp on the map where you're located right now. Let's just see where we're going, or where we are. Let's start off in Wake County. Very good. Now there's a lot of full suns there. I don't know how many people saw the partial sun yesterday or complete eclipsing of the sun, but we may talk about that for a moment today. All right. Okay, good. Hey, we fit every region. That's great. So a lot of stuff going on in the state. It is the middle of the summer. Just a plug for the Plant Diseases Insect Clinic where I work, as well as Mike Munster, who will be getting on here shortly. And also a note about summer. It's been pretty hot and humid. Luckily, it's rained in the last few weeks. It has been pretty dry earlier in the summer, and now the plants are getting it, but there's been some diseases and things like that going on. But the summer is winding down, actually. It went pretty quickly. Should continue to scout for insect pests and diseases. So, Mike and I are going to be talking about those today. Control annual weeds by mulch or pre-emergent herbicides is recommended by the NC Ag Chem Manual. So as we get into the fall, there's going to be a lot more outdoor time and you know, doing a lot of the things in the landscape. Okay. Well, we'll start off with our guest speaker. Our guest speaker today is Mark Weathington, the director of the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. A little bit about Mark. He has MS in horticulture from Virginia Tech. Was a horticulturalist at the Norfolk Botanical Gardens and the Atlanta Botanical Gardens. Has written numerous articles and a book called Gardening in the South. And again, is the director and curator of collections at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. And today he is going to speak to us about the Arboretum and how it can be used by Master Gardener volunteers. Okay, Mark, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Always excited to talk to Extension folks and Master Gardeners. They really are the backbone of what we do. Hopefully many of y'all have been to the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. If not, you should come. We're for free every day of the year. And when I was asked to talk, it was really to talk about what's going on at the Arboretum, how we what we're doing, how we serve extension and master gardeners, and a little bit about our pest control philosophies and what we do to tie in with what y'all are here for. For those who don't know, I'll give a real quick background, just a couple minutes. Dr. J.C. Raulston came to NC State in 1975. We date the starting of the Arboretum at 1976. He wasn't really a ask permission kind of person, more of an ask forgiveness. So he really started planting when he got here. J.C. was charged with helping grow the North Carolina nursery industry, and in his prior travels and career, he had really seen that wherever he went, there were about 40 plants that made up 90% of the nursery industry. There might be the different 40 plants in North Carolina than in Texas, but still. And so he really decided that the best way to grow the industry was to expand the palette of plants, diversify the American landscape, as he said, just because that left more niches for new people to come in, more opportunities for nurseries to grow and differentiate themselves from other nurseries. So that's what he really set about doing, just acquiring plants and planting them and seeing how they did, and then getting them into the hands of nurserymen, plant breeders, interested individuals, that sort of thing. He was a very influential figure. In 2001, Horticulture Magazine commissioned they call the Heavenly Garden Party, and you can see Ernest Wilson there with his lily. You can see Thomas Jefferson, got Gertrude Jekyll, and a couple of North Carolina folks in there. But if you look right behind the little dachshund there, and right behind him with clippers in his hand is J.C. He's got glasses and pruners in his hand. J.C. was famous, infamous, notorious for acquiring cuttings wherever he went, sometimes with permission, sometimes not. And, but he came by that honestly. If you came to the Arboretum and were in the industry, you were encouraged to take cuttings of plants at the Arboretum, and so you could grow some plants. So he may have liberated some cuttings, but he did it with the best of intentions. He really believed, and we still believe, that the purpose of gardening is to share plants and to get more plants out there. That's the best thing we can do. If you want to know more about him, there's a great book by him about him by Bobby Ward that you can pick up. The Arboretum, if you haven't been here, we have kind of an outsized reputation for the size of our Arboretum. We're only 10.5 acres. On that 10.5 acres, we grow nearly 7,000 different types of plants. So we pack a lot into a small area. Got to give a couple of glamour shots to the Arboretum. We really do. We try plants in different conditions. We really abuse plants when we have hot, dry summers, or we have extra wet springs, or crazy winters like this past one where it's 70 degrees in December and gets down below freezing not long after that. We like that because that really lets us learn about how plants perform in the landscape. We do try and plant things in kind of pretty settings, but really it's about getting as many plants in the ground as we possibly can. We do have the UNC System's first green roof. They sometimes forget about us when they talk about it, but we do try and have sustainable programs here. So how do we do all that? We are, other than my salary, we are basically 100% self-supported. We don't get any operational funds from the university. There's myself and one half-time person who are on university payroll the half-time person is getting ready to come off of university payroll and come onto ours. So we do a lot with students. We are part of the department. We love having interns here, student volunteers. They're fantastic. I don't know how often you get to interact with students as master gardeners, but I can tell you, you know, people always talk about them, you know, they're always on their phones or tweeting and twittering, those millennials and whatnot. They're incredible. The more I get to work with the students, the more excited I am about the future of horticulture, because they are smart and hardworking and really intelligent folks. We do lots of classes out at the Arboretum, you know, everything from plant ID to you know, fertilizers, like you see here, construction projects. You know, if you give them good direction, they can do anything. Just gotta tell them what you want, but they really are great workers. And it isn't just horticulture. We have students and researchers, grad students and faculty from the ag engineering, from College of Design, forestry, from plant biology, chemistry, entomology, just all across the chemistry, not just yeah, just all across the spectrum are here doing work. So, you know, talk about us acquiring plants. We do historically and still go all over the place collecting plants. You know, it might be an island off the coast of Korea like Sehuksan. It might be down through the coastal plain and the panhandle of Florida, but really both native and exotic. We're always interested in collecting plants and evaluating them. Sometimes those really pay off in big ways, not really for the Arboretum necessarily, but for the green industry. You take a plant that JC collected on Sehuksan Island, a styrax, Emerald Pagoda, it was eventually named, and that tree has gone out into the hands of nurserymen and really made a fair amount of money for quite a few nurserymen. Chindo viburnum from that same trip has probably put a couple of nurserymen's kids through NC State with what they've made off of that. And so those were things that were given away freely. The Arboretum didn't get anything directly from that. We do get a lot of support from the green industry, you know, in recognition of what we have done and continue to do with them. You know, Chindo viburnum, great fruit on there. Fantasy crepe myrtle, another one introduced from the Arboretum. You know, people ask why we go collecting in places like Asia. The reason why is, I think, is evident in a picture like this. You know, this is about a 6 or 8 foot wide picture, and you see there's a whole bunch of plants that we use in the green industry that are all growing right there in one spot. So it's important not just to bring in new plants, which people often think, but to bring in new genetics. And a lot of those genetics go to plant breeders like Tom Ranney up at the Mountain Crop Improvement Lab in Fletcher, or to other breeders around the country to incorporate new genetics into the plant material we have. An example that I like to give are the Encore azaleas. That reblooming all comes from Rhododendron oldhamii, which is a very late blooming, a fall blooming azalea in Taiwan. All those original Encores all were bred using one clone of Rhododendron oldhamii. So when we went to Taiwan, we collected more genetics and brought those to Tom Ranney to see if we could get something different, something more improved than some of the Encores that were already out there. It is not glamorous. My wife always thinks I'm on vacation when I'm doing that. It is not. It's a lot of cleaning seed and a lot of tromping around through leech-infested areas of the world. Seems like all the best plants are where the most leeches are. But it does pay off. You get back and you start sowing seed, and I won't go into all the permitting and everything here, but we do obey all the laws and regulations and rules. We don't want to bring in any kind of problem plants. We do also have a real vast network of innovative nurseries and plant breeders and interested individuals that we bring in a lot of plants for evaluation. And there's a lot of things out there that people don't know about that really have a lot of use in our gardens. A lot of the plant exploration has always been focused on the Zone 5. There's a whole group of botanic gardens that go collecting up northern China and places like that. And in the public garden world, we call them the Zone 5 Mafia. They kind of forget that down here in Zone 6, 7, 8, where we are, that's where all the big growth in the U.S. is coming from, and we need different plants down here. So there's things like this witch hazel relative that is just getting out into the industry now. It's an evergreen plant. It looks almost like a camellia in terms of foliage, but with silvery backs to the leaves and these huge flowers. Why aren't we growing this? This is a perfect plant for Zone 8, Zone 7B, and it gets huge late winter, early spring, bright pink flowers. Or things like a lindera that's perfectly hardy. This togarashi, this form, that's the new growth on it. Isn't that amazing? We bring these in and we propagate them and we get them in the hands of nurserymen and try and get them to grow them so that other folks can acquire them as well. Or forms of great plants that are already out there, like Elysium floridanum, our own native one, this little dwarf swamp hobbit. How fantastic is that? It grows about 18 inches tall by 36 inches wide. It's deer-proof, full-size flowers and leaves. We've got that in the hands of nurserymen. It's just slow to bump up, but hopefully that'll be available in the next few years. Or new hydrangeas. We did not name this one. Turkey Heaven is not our name. The nurserymen love it. They don't love that name, but that head is even bigger on this oak leaf hydrangea, is even bigger and denser than Harmony. We were throwing around one of these heads like a football. It was so heavy. Other native plants, dwarf dogwoods. There's just so many great things out there. And of course, we also we do some plant breeding, especially when Dr. Denny Werner was director. He did the blue chip and Miss Ruby and lilac chip and ice chip and those sorts of things here. Sometimes we do introduce plants from our collections. We put a name on them, like Emerald Pagoda. This is a new evergreen maple that we've introduced, that we've got out to some of the maple producers. We call it Hong Long, which is kind of a area where we collected it. This is just a short list of the plants that we have directly introduced. What we've done even more of than introducing new plants is introducing people to plants. We've always tried to get the right plants into the right growers' hands to get it out there. So we're credited with introducing many more plants than we actually have. So we hold and I'm going to just to show you kind of what we do with our collections and use our redbud collection. We have a nationally accredited redbud Cercis collection. And so we've used that here for breeding work, introduced new redbuds like Merlot and Whitewater and Ruby Falls. We've also, because we acquire all these redbuds and we grow them out, we grow a lot from seed, we'll often help select them. This is not one that we named. We gave a plant to another nurseryman in North Carolina, and he named this one Big John. It is heavy flowering, very, very large flowers, very upright growth, which people like. Or ones that we did, this one we did name, that we grew for, probably 20 years before we named it, but Kay's Early Hope is one that the nursery industry is really excited about. It's selling very well. It was named for Kay Yao because it starts flowering before March Madness. and finishes flowering after all the rest of our red buds. It really is our first flowering and our last flowering one, so just extremely floriferous. We do a lot of interpretation with our plants, including our nationally accredited collection and tours and whatnot. But we also, it's not just about what we can do in-house. Not just our red bud collection, but all our collections are widely used. There probably doesn't go more than 2 weeks between us being asked for some leaf material to be sent, or living plants, or photos, or something for some academic who is doing some kind of study or breeding work or something with our collections. So it's a very active collection. Now the key to what we're doing has always been about getting plants out to other people. So there's a network called Index Semina, which is Latin for seed list, where you send lists of seeds that you've collected out to other research and botanical institutions. And so we send our list out and we ship seed all over the world through this Index Semina, and we receive seed from all over the world through other people's lists. We love to have nurserymen come in with permission. You can't just come in and do it, but have nurserymen come in and take cuttings to propagate plants. We also, with some guidelines, welcome master gardener groups to come in and do some propagation for if they have display gardens at their places, or if they have plant sales. You can't take 100 cuttings off of our plants, but you can take a handful off of a lot of different plants and get home with pretty good haul of plant material for if they're not to be put. We're not doing that so people can put them in their gardens at home, but so that master gardeners can have plant sales and can display plants in their gardens at extension centers and such. For years, we did a distribution during the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association, their summer show. They've done away with that summer show, so we're trying to figure out how we can keep that program going in a different format to get some plants into the green industry's hands that way as well. And then our big one for our members is our giveaway at the every October. The first Saturday in October, we do about between 3,000 and 4,000 plants that we give away to our members. Only requirement is a membership, and people go home with just dozens of plants, everything from little 3-inch containers to big 5, 7, 15-gallon containers. Whatever we have in the nursery that we want to clear out before winter comes. So, and we have people come from all over the eastern seaboard who are members in Ohio and Maryland and Georgia to come up just for that weekend. And if you're a football fan, it's all done long before kickoff. It starts at 9 and it's over by 9:15. So some other resources besides plant materials that master gardeners and extension agents can get here is our website. We have a lot going on our website, and it's good for those of you who are a little bit farther away and have a hard time getting here. You can search our website. If you go in the horticulture tab and look at current plantings, you can search to see what we have here. You can search, if you want to see what maples we have here, or what agave, or if you want to know about a very specific plant, if you want to know if we have agave ovata frosty blue, you can look it up, or you can look for a list of all our plants. And when you find it, you'll have some information about it, where it is in the arboretum, when we received it and what size it was, when it was planted, the last time we measured it, what the size was, which can give you some really good information about growth rates in the Piedmont in North Carolina. You can map where that plant is, so if there's a specific plant you're interested in, you can find out exactly where it is come find it easily at the Arboretum. And it is mobile friendly, so you can do it on your phone while you're here at the Arboretum as well. We also have a photograph collection that's over 300,000 images now, which you can search on our website by, you know, the name of the plant, the location, the, you know, the photographer, the date, you know, all kinds of different information you can search for and come up with a bunch of pictures. You can't get the full-size images right there, but if for any educational purpose, so for an extension publication, a talk that a master gardener, an extension agent is putting together and they need some images for, you can just email us, and if it's being used for an educational purpose, we'll supply a full-size image for free. If you're using it for some kind of commercial purpose, like, you know, putting on a plant tag or something like that, we charge a nominal fee for that, not a whole lot. But we want people to use it, and it isn't just plant images. There's also great images that we've been taking since JC's time on, you know, different, you know, could be pruning or topiaries or, you know, pests. You can find images of. So it's a really great resource that you can use. We do have a great bloom calendar, which is another great resource if you're writing about plants. Every time we take a picture and put it in our database, we mark whether it's in flower or not in flower, all these different things. And if it's been marked in flower and it's at the Arboretum, it'll be on this list so you can see when it's in flower here. And you can do it by month, or you can do it by an alphabetical list of plant name. So some great resources. We also, every lecture that we do here at the Arboretum, all of the plantsman's tours that we do once a month, if the speaker gives us permission, and I think all but one has done that, we upload the videos to YouTube. So if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, there is a wealth of great talks, things that we've, you know, talks I've given, talks other staff has given, talks that we've had other people in for. So we have the Ginkgo Gold in there is a new one. That was one that was just a couple weeks ago. We had Matt and Tim Nichols from you know, the Maple brothers up in the mountains. They came and gave a talk about ginkgos. Really is a great way to access some phenomenal information. So yeah, Friends Lectures, tours. We co-host the monthly North American Rock Garden Society lecture here, so those lectures are up on our website. And actually what I'm not showing here is we have started doing a monthly lecture with the Wake County Master Gardeners. They give a lecture on a Monday afternoon here every month, and those are hosted on the webs on YouTube as well. Those talks. So it's a great way to get some really good information. It's a great way to find speakers if your Master Gardener group or your county agent or whoever is looking for speakers. You know, you can kind of get a sneak peek at how good a speaker is. You know, if they're entertaining or not, and pick them out that way. We produce a propagation guide for woody plants. It is currently out of print. The last one we did was 2011. We will be putting out a new one within the next several months. That is one of the top goals for a couple of our staff members, is to get that out. And it's a great guide for nurserymen and for people who just want details. We don't not a lot of extraneous information. It's really, you know, take softwood cuttings in these months, grow this plant from seed, that kind of thing. So I want to pivot to a little bit about our kind of pest philosophy here. You know, we think with all things, information is key. You know, people are afraid of insects. Not really any reason to be. I used to take my children out And in the early mornings when it was cool, in the spring and fall when it was cool, we'd go out and find bees that were overnighting in a flower because it had gotten too chilly for them. We'd go out and pick them up and we'd pet them like little puppies, and my kids aren't afraid of bees anymore. And bees are important, obviously. All y'all know that we need bees for food production, for not just for food production. That's often what gets talked about, but a lot of our wild plants rely on pollinators, not just bees, but all kinds of pollinators to move the pollen around so that we have more dogwoods out there and other plants. They really rely on these insects. And I like to point this out. We talk about, I don't know how many talks I've heard where people talk about planting for pollinators and planting for bees and butterflies and that kind of thing. And all the plants they talk about flower from mid-June to mid-August. And they're all the same things, butterfly bush and lantana and these sorts of things. And so I put this on here, and I don't want you to read the whole thing, but this was a analysis of honey from the J.C. Raulston Arboretum. This is just one page. This was 3 pages of the pollen that they found in the honey at the Arboretum. You see that first one on the list, it's maple. There is 10% of the pollen in this honey was from maple. There are very few lists that put maple as a pollinator plant. If you look farther down, you'll see Rus down about 3/4 of the way down. That's 20% of the pollen in this. Willow, a little below that, 14% of the pollen in this. So it's not necessarily the plants that we're thinking are really important for pollinators. Now, part of the reason for this is the timing of when this was analyzed. But the point of this is the more diversity we have in our landscapes, the more the pollinators are going to be successful. The first year we had beehives at the Arboretum, we have a volunteer beekeeper who takes care of them. He came in, after it was cold for a while, with sugar water, like people do to put out by the beehives. And he wound up having to take honey off of the hives during the winter. Said he's never done that before, but our bees, because we get warm and we have so much blooming all year round, are producing honey all 12 months of the year. So we never have to supplement them. And it's really, so when people ask me what should I plant for bees and pollinators, I say plant a lot of different things. Don't worry about whether this specific plant is good for bees or not. What you need to do is just plant a lot of different things that are flowering all through the year, and you're going to be successful with your bees. We do believe that spraying, kills the good bugs along with the bad bugs. So we really, we do almost zero insecticide sprays. We will do some treatment for pests if it's very necessary. We had a tree that was very important to us that was going downhill with Dutch elm disease. We treated that. That's fungicide, not an insecticide. Through injections, we still lost the tree. But for the most part, we'd rather get rid of a plant that's no good than that's always infected with bugs. We also try as much as we can to leave up some of the overwintering structures for the good bugs. If you have a meadow or a butterfly garden. People have a butterfly garden, winter comes and they cut everything down and get rid of everything in there, and they forget that what they're getting rid of are some of the overwintering pupa of butterflies and eggs for the larvae for the next year. Or things like praying mantis. We encourage these things. And sometimes if we had a plant, something that's been a really big problem with insects, we'll go out and we'll look for the praying mantis egg cases, and we'll cut those limbs and we'll stick them in the beds where we were having really bad problems to encourage more praying mantises in those beds. I mentioned we do have bees, and the honeybees get all the press, but there's a whole lot of other solitary bees that are great. This is, if anybody wants to donate, this is what I want to build at the Arboretum. A beautiful house for solitary bees. I think it's important we educate people more on the importance of those little bees that look like wasps and flying ants and things like that. Now, a lot of y'all are, I know y'all help people out with plant problems, and I have an extension appointment, so I get a lot of emails, and I will see people. I know people go to the bargain basement area of their local nursery, and they go and they buy this plant that should have been composted, and they plant it, and it doesn't die immediately. It doesn't get pests immediately. It's a year or two down the road, it starts going downhill. And 2 years after you bought this plant, you forgot that you bought a terrible plant that you should have never bought. You don't go to your Ford dealer and say, I want a cheap truck, give me one that's no good that I know is going to die in a couple of years. That's not what you're doing when you go. You want something that's good quality for what you're paying for. This is bad quality. Don't buy these plants. Don't encourage people to buy these plants, because that's when you pest problems. As an extension agent, I get pictures like this. What do I do for my tree? Nothing. Cut it down, plant a new tree. Plants are not that expensive. Or this. I have this problem every year with my plant. What should I do? You should get rid of it. That's what you should do. What we advocate is building healthy soils. We use a lot of compost. Got some master gardeners in this picture right here. Our volunteers work hard to we mulch with organic material so it breaks down and we build our soil. When we do new beds, we add lots of organic matter. We really want to create a healthy environment, and that does more for reducing pests and insects than any spraying ever could. It's really all about getting that organic matter in the soil. So sometimes it is necessary to spray, necessary to kill the bugs, even if you're going to kill some of the good ones with the bad ones. So there are some good guidelines. Choose lower toxicity pesticides. That does not mean organic. There's an awful lot of organic pesticides that are incredibly toxic. Don't be fooled by it saying it's an organic pesticide. There's a whole lot of organic stuff that'll kill you dead. So it do the same thing for the insects, and if it's killing one insect, it can kill multiples. Go for the lower toxicity over just organic. Ideally, if you have a mite problem, spray a miticide if you have to. Don't spray a 3-in-1 insecticide, miticide, fungicide on the problem. Really target your pest. Spray problem plants. Don't just spray everything as a preventative. Try to avoid plants in flower, because those are the ones that all those pollinators are visiting. And if you can, spray really early when it's still cool out and your all the pollinators and other beneficials aren't quite so active. We have a rose garden. It's an endowed garden, so we're going to have it. We'll always have it. We contracted with, we worked with a rose expert to help us select roses that were good for Raleigh. He gave us a list. We planted a bunch of those, and then he said, do you want me to come in to help maintain? And we said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, I'll come in and spray every 7 to 10 days. We said, well, those aren't good roses if you have to spray every week. So we are doing a no-spray rose garden, and it's looking pretty good. It'd probably look better if we sprayed it all the time, just like your apples look better if they get sprayed all the time and don't have any little insect bites. But we're being ruthless. We are ripping out plants that, if they don't perform well over 2 years, diseases, insects, we get rid of them, and we're trying new plants. And our goal is to find good roses for the southeast that don't require spraying all the time. Maybe futile, but so far it's been working out for the last couple of years. So I hope you'll come visit the Arboretum if you haven't been here before, or if you haven't been here in a while. It is always changing. The plants are changing. The gardens are changing. It's always exciting. So hope you'll come out and see us and enjoy the Arboretum. And then now I'm happy to take questions, however that works best for everybody. I don't know how that works, Matthew, if it's to take questions.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, so if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to either type them in the chat box at the lower left, or you can hit the little hand button at the top of the participants field, and that'll raise your hand so you'd like to ask a question. Gina.
Yeah. Hey, Mark, that was very interesting. I love hearing about all that you offer there. But my question is about your soil management. I know you get in a bunch of the leaf compost, or at least I think you do, from the landfill. Is that right? And if so, do you actually mix that in the soil, or do you use it as a top mulch?
Thanks, Gina. And I should mention, Gina is great working with us. This is the best relationship I've ever had working with master gardeners, with the Wake County master gardeners here now. Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great question about the leaf litter and our soils. So, no, we do not mix the leaf litter, and it's actually all university leaves. We don't mix the leaf litter in with our soil. When we're doing new beds, when we're starting from scratch, we will, like say we have hard clay, we're doing a new bed, we go in, we till the bed as deep as we can, and then we put down a layer of, depending on what we're growing, pure compost and good sifted topsoil, compost and permatill in some cases. We put a layer of that down, we till that in, and then we mound up over that with our compost and topsoil mix. And we do that so that water will move through. We don't want a hard layer. So we till first, till something into that tilled clay, and then go up. And that way you have a good profile from the really good stuff all the way down to the clay, and water moves through there. We don't get a really hard barrier there. And then we mulch with the partially composted leaves. And and we do that because the leaves break down, and over years, and gardening is a patient process, you really build soil. And there's an awful lot of people who mulching, they want to do as little mulching as possible, as infrequently as possible, and we go the opposite route. We look at that as a way to keep building our soil. So, there's a lot of people mulch with pine straw, and that's fine. Pine straw does not break down quickly. It's really good for weed control. It's excellent in a lot of ways, but it doesn't build soil very fast, doesn't build the organic matter in your soil. And when you get into some of those things like the rubber mulches and stuff like that, that stuff's awful. You're doing nothing to help your soil with it.
Thanks, Mark. We have 2 questions in the chat box, one from Donna and one from Elaine.
Okay, if master gardeners from other counties would like to come and volunteer, how do they do that? You just get in touch with us. We have a volunteer coordinator, Catherine Wall. She'll sign you up as a volunteer. Now, if you want to volunteer as a master gardener and get master gardener hours, that's something you have to work out with your agent, how that works out. And I'm sure they can talk to Gina and see how she does that. I've worked at some gardens where the feeling was volunteering and working in the garden wasn't fulfilling the role of a master gardener. I don't agree with that. I think if you're going to answer questions, the more gardening you're exposed to, the more plants you're exposed to, the better. But yeah, if you just want to volunteer, get in touch with us, and we do there's a online form you fill out that kind of gauges where you're interested in volunteering, whether it's in the garden or with our children's programs or adult programs or other areas, and we'll hook you up. All right. In your research, do you do anything with GMOs? Okay. Genetically modified organisms. Completely misunderstood. All plant breeding is creating GMOs. Encore azaleas are GMOs. We have genetically modified those organisms through manipulating them by selective breeding. If you're talking about putting one gene into, moving genes, genetic transfers, that sort of thing through other more mechanical means, there's a little bit that we do here. And I think GMOs get painted with a broad brush, which is a mistake. The issue should not be whether a plant is a GMO or not. It's what is that GMO? Roundup Ready vegetable, crops. Yeah, there could be a big issue with that. The crops, corn, where they've inserted the genes from Bacillus thuringiensis (BT) to keep pests away. Yeah, that's a real problem because that floats off with the pollen and that kills our butterflies and caterpillars, and that can be a real issue. If it's doing something to create a blue rose, is there a problem with that? That's not going to hurt. That's not going to escape in any way. So you have to be really careful about what we mean with GMOs. We are currently evaluating a plant that has never been that you can't grow here in the southeast, that has been genetically modified to tolerate heat. So we're seeing how that works out. It's really more of a academic look at it than anything that has any immediate application. But yeah, we are not anti-GMO at all. We are anti-GMO ignorance, though. I think half of the question. I'm in the process of creating a nature trail on a couple acres of my land. I don't have anything beyond that. Great.
It says it's asking what would you recommend for paths? What medium?
Oh, what would you recommend for paths? Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Can you slow down a little bit? Yep.
Yep. For paths, it depends on how often you want to replace them. If it's flat, pine straw is great for a path because it does mat so well. It's cheap and easy to put out.
Mark, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
Is there music playing in your background? Or
it's not my background.
Somebody's playing music and it's going on right now. Let's see. Not sure. It's not showing up who's playing that.
Not me. Okay, sounds like.
Actually, can you turn off your mic, Mark, real quick? Just 1 second. I'm going to turn mine off and see.
All right, I'm cranked pretty high up.
Actually, if you could turn your mic off for a second, I want to see something.
No, there was music being played. I know it was. Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm really not sure whose that is. If somebody's got music playing, please turn it off. Or if you got your mic on accidentally, please turn it off. It might be a call. Yeah, let's see.
Okay.
There you go. I think it was that conference call, maybe.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, so trail paths and nature trails. So pine straw, if you've got slopes and things, pine straw can be really slick, and I don't recommend it there. Wood chips are great. You need to replace them occasionally. You know, if you want to go beyond that, you know, you can dig out and put down gravel. You know, if you wanted something that's more, you know, long term. But pine straw and wood chips are, I think, are kind of the best things because they're more natural there in the woodland. So, yeah, I don't know if y'all reading this. Dr. Myers says the Wake Master Gardeners can earn 10 of their 40 hours volunteering at the Arboretum. So, there you go. Now, so there's also a question about paths, medium for paths in the garden. I'll tell you what I'm loving right now for paths in the garden, maybe not for a nature trail through the woods. We're using a product called Clingstone Paths with a K, Clingstone. And what it is you put down, you know, you put down your base gravel and then top it with a stone of your choice. It can be a little decorative stone or something more practical, but small size stone. You put that down, and then you put this stuff called Clingstone Paths on top of it. Kind of goes on like maple syrup, and it locks the stone in place. It makes it like concrete almost, except it's permeable. And so you've got this really solid surface, lasts a long time, really easy to put down. And if you want, you do your stone path with, you know, the stone that you like, you've got it all locked down with the Clingstone Paths, then you can sprinkle more of that stone on top. So you've got a solid path that is water permeable, but then you also have, it has that feel of a loose gravel path, just because you've got a little bit of stone that kind of moves under your feet, but you don't have the stone washing away everywhere and going all over the place. It's really, I love it as a path medium. We've used it several times here, and when people come to the Arboretum, it is the most asked question we have is, what is that path material? Question, can I schedule a Master Gardener tour for the Master Gardeners of Hendersonville? You can indeed. Just go on our website, jcra.ncsu.edu, and you can find a link there for how to schedule a tour. We love Master Gardeners. Yeah. What medium do you use for ADA compliant paths? The Clingstone, yes. We also use Chapel Hill gravel, which is ADA. We use paver paths for ADA. Accessibility, those are the main ADA paths. Oh, thank you, Matthew, for getting that link up there for Clingstone Paths. Oyster shells is a path medium. Yeah, I gardened for a decade almost in Norfolk, Virginia, so coastal Virginia. I love oyster shells. The one downside to oyster shells in a sunny garden is that white is so bright. You know, when you go out on a day like today, at least here in Raleigh, and the sun is shining brightly and it's already, you know, in the low 90s, and you have that bright white oyster shell path, it can be a lot. It can be kind of overpowering. So in the shade, I really like it. In the sun, I like something a little bit darker that mutes that reflection a bit.
Okay, well, let's do one more question, and then maybe you can email Mark if you have any other questions.
Yeah, and I meant to mention this. There's one question here I'll answer, but I did mean to mention this, that one other resource that we are really great about is identifying garden plants. Weeds we're okay on. Pests, your local extension agent is probably as good or better than we are here. But if you've got a plant that you don't know what it is, feel free to email a good picture of it. Don't take a terrible picture and expect us to identify it. And if you do that, we're happy to help you out with that. Last question, do we have any sort of Master Gardener Day where many different counties can get together? And the answer to that is no, we don't, but we would be, we'd certainly be interested in working with some Master Gardeners about doing something like that. We love having master gardeners here. You know, maybe it's something that that our local group can think about, and we can talk about how to make that happen, because we certainly love that. We have some professional days, field days, where we have a lot of master gardeners will come, but we don't have a specific day. And again, I think that'd be a great idea. And also, if any groups ever want to partner on any kind of program, we'd be interested in looking into that. Like I said, we started partnering on a monthly program with our Wake County Master Gardeners, but we would also be open to doing, you know, one-time things or whatever with groups. All right. I would keep answering questions, but I know there's more to the program than myself.
Well, very popular, Mark. Thank you very much for speaking today, and I hope more people make connections and more people visit the Arboretum. I know I do, Mike as well, and it's close to me, so I enjoy it. But thanks again for speaking, and we'll talk to you later.
All right. Thank you very much.
All righty. And now for my segment and Mike's segment. So we're talking about entomology and plant pathology issues. I'll be going first with Mike coming after me. All right. Well, this time I'd like to talk to you about two main groups of insects. One I've been seeing a lot of this year, so I want to address this insect and in my own garden, and we've seen some samples from fields come out. This is the garden flea hopper. The garden flea hopper. This is a true bug, a hemipteran in the family Miridae. It used to be called Halticus bractatus, but after a new revision of the group just came out a couple years ago, it has now been transferred to the genus Microtechnites, which is a crazy sounding name. These are very small insects, about 2 millimeters long. There's several genera in the group in the U.S., but this genus and species is the most important pest. You can see here what a typical one looks like, and I'll be showing you some more specifics in a moment. Now, it's found throughout eastern half of the U.S. and Canada. It gets a little bit less common as you get close to the Rockies, and it is not found on the West Coast. But it is a very common insect. Some years more so than others, and like I said, this year has been pretty high numbers of them, lots of damage. And actually, if you can mention in the chat box whether you've seen these in your gardens or on plants out in agricultural systems, I'd love to know what the prevalence is. Okay. So, these are called flea hoppers, not flea beetles. They look similar to flea beetles, but they are a true bug and not a beetle. So they're different in many ways. So to differentiate between a flea beetle, like these two on the right, versus a flea hopper on the left, basically flea hoppers, like most true bugs, have very few segments in their antennae. So these actually have only 4 segments in their antennae, whereas if you look over to the right, the flea beetles have many segments in their antennae. Also, of course, the big defining feature, but difference between true bugs and beetles is going to be what that arrow shows, the sucking mouth parts on the face, of course, that they use to suck plant juices. Flea beetles, of course, have chewing mouth parts. They will be creating the holes, as is seen in the bottom right photo. So these two characters can help you identify flea hoppers from flea beetles. Okay. Now, these are an interesting group of insects in that they come in a couple different morphs. So there have been some mistaken information online about that females are all brachypterous, which means short-winged, and males are all long-winged. Well, what actually is the case is that the males are always long-winged, as seen over on the right here. But females can be long-winged or short-winged. And if you see, the short wings are really these leathery little kind of stumpy wings. They don't have a membrane as seen in the middle photo and the right photo. So all these are the same species. This species also is very noticeable and identifiable based on these little white pairs of scales, white or iridescent. They're kind of that make it look like it's little tiny white spots all over the wings. This is the defining character for this species. And again, like I said, this is the most common species you're going to see out there. They also have fairly banded antennae that have kind of lighter beige or brown areas and darker black stripes. Again, these are very small insects. They look like little black dots kind of on your, about the size of a small aphid, but not in groups, not in very large, high-density groups. I see they look like cricket legs, so that's why they're called flea hoppers, because they jump like fleas, they hop. So you've got kind of both jumping kinds of names in the name. They do hop. I've read also that unlike flea beetles, flea hoppers jump a very short distance. Flea beetles will often jump right off the leaf that they're on, and you know, to get away from anything. So keep an eye out for these. Now the damage, they have the sucking type damage. Right here, the white star or kind of diffuse stippling. This is characteristic of a lot of things like leaf hoppers, which are especially on mints and many of the herbs. Also looks similar to, say, thrips damage sometimes, and a couple other sucking type insect damages. But one of the other noticeable bits of evidence is that they also produce dark fecal spots. They're sucking all that green and that dark pigment out of the plant. When they defecate, they leave these random black or dark brown, dark green fecal spots. So looking for the insects, and also, again, looking for this type of damage on plants can be key to identifying flea hoppers. Now, garden flea hoppers, this is my little garden with my little daughter. This got overrun by them this year. You know, not too much to really spray. I didn't really do much, and also I like insects, of course. So, but they prefer legumes, but feed on many hosts. Now, some of the typical garden vegetables that they'll attack are beans, beets, cabbage, celery, cowpea, cucumber, eggplant, lettuce, pea, pepper, potato, pumpkin, squash, sweet potato, and tomato. I happen to see a lot on my squash, both cantaloupe and cucumber, but also right on the nearby tomatoes, and the peppers didn't seem to be attacked too much, but the tomatoes were attacked a little bit. Now in the field, they'll feed on alfalfa, clover, and sweet clover, and some also annual and horticultural plants, so chrysanthemum, daisies, marigolds, and salvia. And of course, lots and lots and lots of weeds. And weeds are a good host for them around gardens. Now the flea hopper life cycle. Now I'm not sure if anybody saw on Facebook, I posted the photo on the left of the egg as a mystery. Well, there's your answer. I'll probably update it today just to make sure people who weren't tuning in today would be able to see it. But basically, I had a sample of soybeans come in that had a lot of damage on them, and there were a lot of these flea hoppers on them out in the field, and I found this one interesting little egg. So the females is this little banana-shaped egg with this little cap, a lot like a lot of true bugs have that cap. and the female injects this egg halfway into the leaf tissue. So look for that, but you'll obviously also see a lot of the adults and other life stages. So here's a younger nymph, older one getting more wing pad before it becomes an adult male or female, mates, and completes the cycle. Now in Virginia at least, and probably North Carolina, about 5 generations per year of overlapping generations. And they are supposedly overwinter as an egg, but in the south, say Florida and Georgia, they probably also overwinter as adults as well. So you will have both adults, eggs, and multiple growth stages of the nymphs present on plants at one time. Okay, what can be done about garden flea hoppers? Well, they're typically a pest of home gardens, not of production, not of agricultural systems. Although this year I saw some commercial landscapes that were affected, and that the one soybean field had a lot of damage, so they can be an issue there. Chemical control used for other sucking insects, for example, aphids will work on these. And it may not be needed, and I'm not sure what the thresholds are, but in a home garden, you may want to look for the stippling and for the presence of a lot of the insects actually on the leaves. Also, eliminating weeds around the gardens will help reduce where their eggs, the overwintering eggs and adults are, and will also reduce the food sources and the contact between the garden and those flea hoppers. So these are some basic ways to help reduce flea hopper pressure on home gardens, and you can look in the NC Ag Chem manual for what can be used in the home. Are there any questions about flea hoppers? All right, if you do, just type it in the text box, and I'll try and answer your questions. And now I'm going to move on to one of my favorite groups of insects, one you may see about, not necessarily pests, but it's an interesting group, and that is the velvet ants. These are very beautiful and kind of very interesting group of Hymenoptera, or wasps. They're in the family Mutilidae. And there are about 480 species in the U.S. and about 8,000 species worldwide. So it's a very large group of wasps. They range in size from 4 to 30 millimeters. Right here is Dasyamutilla occidentalis, the common cow killer. It is one of our largest ones around here, getting to be almost an inch long as adults. So they can be decent-sized insects, but can range down to only a few millimeters long. Now they are parasitoids of various insects. Typically they parasitize the pupae and prepupae, so they're not really parasitizing larvae or things that are active. They wait until the host is kind of inactive to parasitize it. They live typically in various environments, but typically in arid regions. So you see a lot in the sandhills and the coastal plain of North Carolina. You see a lot there's a huge diversity of them in the southwestern U.S., in the deserts. They are brightly colored, especially the diurnal or the day active species. There's a whole group of night active velvet ants that you rarely see, obviously. But the day active ones are going to be crawling around erratically, very fast, very nervous looking, very brightly colored, and this one, for example, when I was photographing it, you could hear the sounds. They stridulate or rub these kind of file and scraper on each other, and you could hear it from several feet away, this specimen. And that's all to warn that they can give a very, very painful sting. Their sting on the Schmidt pain index, if you want to look it up, Schmidt pain index goes up to 4 or just a little over 4 for the bullet ant, which is the most painful stinging wasp in the world. Velvet ants are a solid 3, so they will leave you in a lot of pain for a good amount of time. So be careful, but observe them. They're going to be doing their own thing, and they are not aggressive, but just don't pick one up. Its stinger is about half the length of the body, almost the whole length of the body, very long and needle-like, as you'll see in a moment. So, what do they do? Well, this little tiny Pseudomythoca I took out in Avery County when I was out there during a graduate student orientation trip a couple weeks ago. I found this, and I don't have a lot of photos of velvet ants because they're so fast and erratic, it's very difficult to get photos of them. This one was pretty good, so I got some decent photos. It's a very small specimen, and it was running around. Now, this is another photo I got of it. Can anybody tell me what it's doing here? Anybody want to guess? Nest? That's a good guess. There is a nest there. Laying eggs? Nope, not yet. You can see hunting earthworms. That's a good guess, but not quite. Gathering something, kind of looks like it. Cleaning fecal. So actually, what it's doing right there is it is antenating or touching its antennae to the castings that are coming from this hole. Now, what's producing that hole? Well, ground nesting bees. This is a ground nesting sweat bee. There was an area of mud where a number of different families and species of little solitary bees were digging. And of course, it's coming to check that out because they are ectoparasitoids, typically of bees and solitary wasps. But they have found them that some species that have parasitized flies, especially the tsetse fly in Africa actually has a species that parasitizes the pupae. Lima-coated moths, or the slug moths, beetles, and cockroaches. But for the most part, most of them are either social or solitary wasp parasitoids. And they go in and they sting pupae, and their larvae develop on the outside and feed on the bee or wasp prepupae or pupae. And it's actually really interesting. The first life cycle that was worked out for them was because somebody was keeping, in Europe, was keeping bumblebees, and noticed these velvet ants were really interested in the bee colony. And at first they thought they were some kind of social insect that wanted the nest, but basically they figured out that these velvet ants were parasitizing the bees. Okay, so velvet ants are interesting in that the males and females are very different. This is the same species, Dasyamutilla vesta from North Carolina. The males are winged, and the females are wingless. And now there are some males that are wingless, but they're very rarely found. I'm not even sure which species, but you can see they kind of look like they're pipe cleaners. They've got a lot of rings and lots of fuzz everywhere. They're very velvety and hairy, as their name suggests. And if we look closer at some of the characteristics, the first thing is that a lot of species, a lot of groups of velvet ants are characterized by this little feathery line on the first abdominal segment that's called the felt line. Now, not all of them have that, but that's a good indication that you have a velvet ant. And you can actually see here the really long stinger. It goes much further out than that, and they use this to pierce the cocoons and the different types of pupae of their hosts. Another thing is they have these very round eyes typically on the side of their head. They're very, very hardened. They're very difficult to pin because they're very sclerotized, so that they don't get, if they get into combat, say with their wasp hosts, they don't suffer too much injury. And unlike true ants, they don't have a petiole, so there are no extra little kind of beads in between. Ants will have one or two little kind of small bead-like segments or whatnot in between the abdomen and the thorax. Also, the antennae are very curly in mutilids and the velvet ants rather than elbowed as in ants, true ants. Also, the hairy nature is typically different than most ants. Now, we have a lot of really cool velvet ants here, but I was searching through the collection for these photos and for these specimens for the photos, and noticed a couple of really pretty ones, so I had to show everybody. These are not native, but my first one is this one Traumatomutillo, which you can tell from the name probably has a really bad sting. It's also very brightly colored. You can see very interesting patterns of white strip on its head, these white stripes, and these are actually bare, shiny orange spots. Very, very pretty, very large one, about the size of our typical cow killer here. And my favorite, though, was this one. It's fairly large, but this is Hoplonathoca guatemalteca. This is from Costa Rica. You can see it has this hugely wide head and very long mandibles. Here's the stinger, long abdomen. It's actually a fairly large size one with the big head, and most of them have a little bit smaller heads, but some of them have very wide heads. This one does have a golden hair piece on its head, similar to some people, but it's a pretty interesting wasp otherwise. I think it's a very nice looking wasp. All right, now one of the last interesting thing about velvet ants that I think is worth noting is that they actually have apparently one of the largest mimicry complexes of insects in the world, of actually all animals in the world. Now, mimicry complex is when multiple different types of organisms evolve similar looks, because if they all look dangerous, then animals will basically avoid them because they don't know whether it's truly dangerous or not. Now, this is called a Mullerian mimicry complex. Mullerian mimicry is when all of the things are venomous or poisonous, and but they still all kind of converge on similar looks. And so what's really interesting here is you can see these different regions. So say where we would be contained, so in the eastern region. So this is 7 genera of velvet ants, and 52 species have converged along this similar type of look, which is different than some of these other looks. This paper is interesting in that it recognized 2 complexes from near Texas and Central and South America. But you can see, number of genera, 10 genera here, and 57 species all have a very similar look. And they actually plotted these looks and found these discrete groups that converge on similar coloration. It's called aposematic coloration. That means it's warning coloration, because again, they do have a very painful sting, and again, they even produce sound to warn that they don't want to be messed with. So, very cool velvet ants. If anybody has any questions, please let me know, and I'll hope to answer them. So lastly, before I turn it over to Mike, some bolos, so be on the lookout. So right now is actually a good time to start removing bagworm bags if they've been allowed to get to their full size. It's definitely good to start removing them. They're going to be either mating right now or already have mated, and the females are going to start laying eggs in the bags. Now make sure when you remove them to slice the silk attachment point and unwrap that, because that will girdle twigs and branches if left alone. I've also noticed when I was traveling out to that student orientation, there were a lot of fall webworms already in the mountains, but I've been seeing them a lot around here too. So the fall webworms are out and about, and actually a lot of things are pretty active. The oakworms are out, and the other types of large caterpillars are. We've been getting a lot of calls and samples about cicadas and cicada killers, so they are obviously out and about. Goldenrod is starting to bloom, and you're going to get a lot of interesting insects. Here's a black blister beetle sitting on goldenrod, and that's a good place to observe lots of really pretty insects and insects that you may not see because they come in. They're very attracted to the goldenrod. Now the univoltine, the insects and other arthropods that are have one generation a year, are at their largest now. They are early in the year they kind of hatch from their eggs. They start to develop throughout the early summer. They were beginning to complete development, and now we've got older, mature, fully mature insects and other arthropods that are now mating. Some are biting the heads off their mates, like this Carolina mantid on campus. And they're starting to prepare to lay eggs that will then overwinter. So the caterpillars, the large caterpillars, are finishing up their feeding. They're going to start to crawl to the ground. You guys start to see a lot more large frass, but they'll crawl to the ground to bury themselves in the soil to pupate and come out next year. The black and yellow garden spiders, mantises, and assassin bugs are their largest size. They'll be mating and getting ready to lay eggs that will overwinter. And wasp nests like hornets and yellow jackets are going to be getting to about their largest size for the season, and so be careful around those, and just note and try to control or call a professional to control these large wasp nests. And soon enough, it's going to be starting to wind down the season, and we'll start to see changeover and kind of a lack of insects. But this time of year is a lot of activity because there's a lot of things going on, a lot of changeover. Okay, and we got one question from Mart. When should you spray bagworm on Leyland cypress? Well, so bagworms, right now it's just too late. Unfortunately, they are either, like I said, pupating or just about, still caterpillars, just about to pupate. And basically, they're not going to hatch until next May or June. So what I suggest to people is that in May or June, if you had a plant that had a lot of bagworms on it, or plants nearby that plant, basically use a sheet of paper or some kind of bed sheet or something and beat the branches around May or June onto that. If you see little tiny bagworms, they'll only be about 5 millimeters long or so, even with the bag. That's the best time to treat because they're the most susceptible when they're young. As they get older, they become less and less susceptible. So again, also removing the bags now and the bags even next spring before the eggs hatch can really take out hundreds of individuals from the population. Okay, Debbie, how to rid webworms from neighbor's hanging tree? Well, I guess that depends on how good of a relationship you have with your neighbor. But also, basically, some of the none. Well, I would definitely figure out a relationship with them if that's the case. But basically, there are a number of ways you can help with the webworms. For chemical controls, spraying the leaves that are not in the bag, but or in the tent and nearby. That's where the caterpillars are going to be exposed to it. Breaking open the webs can help predators and parasitoids go in. It may be too late now, I'm not sure, but also make sure that there's activity still going on. And even just pruning that branch and removing it and destroying it will help. But again, if it's on your neighbor's property, that's obviously another layer to that issue. And what spray? You'd have to consult the Ag Chem manual. I don't know offhand what sprays to use, but they are a caterpillar, and so basically, trying to catch the tent early on is the best bet because, again, once they get a little bit more mature, it takes a lot more chemical, and it may not even be effective. But there's information online about what to spray and what the best times of year for fall webworm treatment is. All right, no problem. And yeah, so it would be great to have a chart of emergent times and best time to spray. Unfortunately, a lot of those are, can be kind of generalized, but really it depends on the year. We had a lot of more different kind of activity this year. So, basically be observing, know the history of your plants around and what typically attacks them. Look early on to monitor for the pests, and that will tell you a lot about how active they are. For instance, not a plant pest, but we have had very few mosquitoes this year until recently because of the rains. Earlier in the summer it was very dry, and so there was no breeding habitat really for mosquitoes. And once it started to rain, we start to see more mosquitoes now. So you can't really predict necessarily year to year. As again, for a general season, yes, but the amount of rain, the weather, the local weather and temperatures, these can all affect the development and the prevalence of the insects. Like I said, flea hoppers, I wouldn't have been talking about them except for I noticed them this year and we got a few samples in. Otherwise, they are fairly minor pests, so it may have been something about this year that would have encouraged flea hopper populations. And I don't know what that is. All right. So if there are no other questions, I'll be turning it over to Mike.
And that, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, let me just chime in on that last one. Doesn't Steve Frank have, at least for producers, for nurserymen, nurserywomen, some kind of a growing degree day-based pest emergence alert system?
That I'm not sure, but I will ask him and see. And if so, let me write that down. I will ask him, and if so, next time I'll try and share it with everybody during the presentation. We made one, you know, Mike, we made one a few years ago for the Landscape Field Day about some of the landscape plants. We still need to work that out a little bit, but I think, you know, it does vary a lot from year to year.
And of course it varies from pathogen to pathogen and pest to pest too, whether they're strongly seasonal or if they have kind of a more widespread distribution throughout the season.
Yep. So it's tough, and everybody's always asking, oh, there's fewer insects this year. It could be observational, it could be obviously anecdotal and observational. It could just be actual conditions, and it's really difficult because it takes a lot of time and money to study year after year, even just one particular organism, and so we really don't have a lot of that information. Well, Mike, I'll turn it over to you. Hopefully you're not too tired.
Well, you may find me face down on my keyboard after we log off here, but we'll see how far we get. If everyone could give a green check if you can hear me okay. I see 2 or 3, so maybe people finding their checkbox. Once again, looks like we're getting through. All right, let me begin with a little bit of a reheated leftover. This was an image sample that came in the day before, I think, our last session at PP&P, but it was a pretty full schedule already, and so I wasn't able to work it in. But I thought it was worth mentioning because it's something that we haven't really talked about. We don't see it that often. But let me pose the question first. Does anybody know what the problem is with this white oak trunk? No takers on that? You see these areas where the bark looks very different. Deer antlers, interesting thought, but no, don't think so. Slime flux. Slime flux would be more localized. On white oak, it's typically toward the base of the plant, and you would have that stained area if you don't have active fluxing. No, not a lichen either. This, and I think this chuck diagnosis based on the photograph. I know car crash. We have had that actually. I think we have had a car crash situation where. But that's another story. No, this is, at least according to Chuck's diagnosis on the pictures, something called smooth patch. What happens here is that there are certain fungi that will get in and decay essentially that rough, dead outer bark, which then sloughs off, leaving the slightly smoother, slightly lighter colored, slightly less raised and fissured outer bark, the inner bark showing, and the patches will get larger over time, but it's not a threat to the health of the tree at all because it's not attacking, or these fungi are not attacking living tissue, just the dead outer bark. But obviously the appearance could be alarming to a homeowner. There are several different fungi that are involved in this. One of them, I don't know if you'd call this smooth patch really because the bark of the eastern red cedar is already pretty smooth, but this would be an example of the kind of fungus that would cause this, fairly inconspicuous in its fruiting bodies. This particular one would be Dendrothele nivosa. Remember, nivosa means snow-covered, so you can tell they're very white fruiting bodies there of this basidiomycete fungus is what gave it its name. Now I'd like to go on to some material that I prepared on the same lines that I was working through the earlier plant pests and pathogens this year. For those of you who were tuned in and remember, in February I talked about anthracnose diseases, and then 2 months later talked about downy mildews, 2 months later talked about powdery mildews, and this time around I decided to do a session on one of our #1 problems in the landscape, which is the genus Phytophthora. And I'll be calling it, and during this presentation, I'll be calling it a fungus, even though we now recognize and have for a couple of decades that they are not true fungi, that they're actually members of the oomycetes, and I hope to show an example of one interesting characteristic that they have that makes them different from most true fungi. The really important thing is when you do get down to those cases where chemical control is needed, which won't be really something that in most cases homeowners are going to be doing, but then you have biochemical differences between Phytophthora, downy mildews, other oomycetes, and the true fungi that make it so that some fungicides would be good for one group, some for the other, and some for both. Let me... sorry, I see a question here from Lisa. Does Dendrothele nivosa cause issues for the tree? No, not really. It's just there as a saprophyte on the dead outer bark and part of the characteristic look of many of our cedar trees. So there's no health concerns for a tree that does have that. So I've titled this the many faces of Phytophthora because there are a lot of different angles, and we sometimes tend to paint this with too broad a brush, but I hope to be able to do a little bit of detail here so that we can understand it more clearly. First of all, though, an opportunity to use your whiteboard. So those who haven't done it in a while, such as myself actually, if you look, you may be already as a, let's see, the little letter A with some lines on it in the over on this side somewhere if you've left the default settings on your interface here and collaborate. But if you can find that text box and then type here on the whiteboard what you think might be our #1, #2, and #3 Phytophthora diagnoses, in this case in home landscapes, according to our database since January 1st of 2008. And then you'll notice that the annuals, first let me point out that all of these from here all the way around, so more than 3/4, are some kind of woody plants. So there's a hint right there. But then of our annuals, my question for you is, what is the #1 annual plant on which we diagnose Phytophthora in the home landscape? So again, if I saw a letter pop up there and then disappear, and someone was writing it. Okay, remember these first three are going to be actually woody plants. See some things in the chat box here coming through. Buxus impatiens, I assume you're answering for the annuals there. Rhododendron, okay, and now we're getting I think I've seen the top ones already somewhere in the list on the chat box, and I am going to go ahead and show the answer. So those who said boxwood, yes, that large pie segment there, more than a quarter of the total Phytophthora samples from home landscapes are on boxwoods. And then the second would be our azalea rhododendron combined, and then the third would Leyland cypress. So several of you got those in the chat box, actually. And I will answer the last point there about the last blank with this question. I'm going to quick change the polling to the A through E. 1 second. Okay, now instead of a checkbox or green check, red X, you will have an A, B, C, D, E as a choice for this question. What is the name of this plant? So if you go to underneath where your name is, where you would raise your hand or throw in an emoji, there would be a place to answer A, B, C, D, or E. Okay. And let's go ahead and see how the responses came through. Published to whiteboard. All right. Well, that's very interesting. Okay. Yes, those who selected E are correct. Many people call this plant annual vinca. The scientific name, of which used to be Vinca rosea, is now Catharanthus roseus. We call it Madagascar periwinkle, but that's a pretty cumbersome common name, so a lot of people, of course, go with the annual vinca. And Taricitas, that's what my wife calls it, because that's what they're called where she's from. So that was a little bit of a curve there, but some of you saw through that low smoke screen and recognize it as all of the above. And it turns out that this is the #1 plant that we see Phytophthora on. In fact, I'll tell a little story about that in a minute. But first, another question. Let me change the polling now to A, B, C, D. 1 moment, and I will, let's see. Okay, so now I'll clear this is nothing to clear. So go ahead and take a close look at these photographs. These were both from commercial landscapes in Durham County in August of 2012. Both of them are annual vinca. And if you would choose A, if you think #1 is Phytophthora aerial blight, B if you think #2, C if you think both of them, and D if you think neither. And while you're doing that, Pam, I see you have your hand raised. Did you have a comment or question? Okay, I'll just lower that then. Take a few more seconds here. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we have 7 out of 67 who think it was picture #1, 5 who think it's picture #2, 4 who say both, and 1 who says neither. All right, if you said A, you were correct. Let's see who has an A. I'm going to pick on Christine Stecker, Christine, why did you think, or how did you know that it was picture number 1? All right, looks like she's typing there. It looked more widespread. Okay, I hadn't thought about that. But I don't think that's the main thing we'll be looking for. It's certainly more widespread as far as common problem. What it turns out is that number 2 is Rhizoctonia aerial blight. And the way you can do that, other than having a microscope in a laboratory and some selective media to plate it on, is the fact that those leaves in number 2 are much more matted together with the fungal mycelium, which you don't really get with the Phytophthora aerial blight. But even if you didn't have that, if you say Phytophthora and you see this kind of symptom, you're going to be right probably 95% of the time. Both are blight and both be treated the same. Both are blight, but they would not necessarily be treated quite the same. Actually, the thing that you would do the same would be trying to keep the moisture level down in the foliage and probably some mulching, but I'll get into that in a minute. So yeah, your cultural controls actually would be the same. There are some resistant varieties out there to Phytophthora in the genetics of the annual vincas, but it turned out that there are different races, so that it may not work everywhere or all the time. So that would be something that would be different between these two. But I'll talk about those cultural measures in a moment. First, a couple of close-ups of this. Actually came from in front of my house several weeks ago now, and it looked like it was going to be a bad year for Phytophthora aerial blight in the annual vincas. We have these things. We don't plant these anymore. We did years ago, but they just reseed themselves and come up every year, and every year we get either more or less Phytophthora in them, and so on. So it's our own little Darwinian sort of experiment. But I thought it was going to be a bad year, and then the rains shut down, and it didn't really go very far, and I haven't been back long enough to see how they look now. But the good news is it didn't seem to have gone into the roots this year. Once that happens, then it's game over. But I removed these blighted shoots, and things seem to be all right once it stopped raining, but I wouldn't be able to keep ahead of it if it were a wetter situation weather-wise. Notice that you get the blighting of the shoots, you get the grayish-green diffuse blotch on the leaves, and let's see, if you see this kind of thing on the stem, then you've got a really good idea that you're dealing with the Phytophthora aerial blight of Cantharanthus. Before I go further, though, I want to tell you a little story. Back in the late 90s, when I was first working in the clinic, there was a woman. I happened to answer the phone both times, but a woman called and said, "I think my neighbor is putting chemicals on my plant." And she described the plant and the problem, and I said, "Well, that sounds like it's Phytophthora blight. Why don't you send us a sample?" Which she did. It turned out to be that. The report was sent to her, and then she called back and said, "I think my neighbor is putting fungus on my plant." So sometimes it's the diagnosis is helpful, and sometimes the diagnosis doesn't really get to the root of the problem, which I'm sure you're very familiar with in the Master Gardener desks. But before we go and talk about control of these diseases, I just want to expand the idea now to Phytophthora root rot, which is what we are mostly dealing with when we're talking about Phytophthora in the home landscape. So here are cases in boxwood, in a creeping raspberry here on campus. Notice that the reddish small leaves, smaller than normal, and in the Leyland cypress there from Johnson County. Does anybody want to say how you would know that that picture in the upper left would not be boxwood blight? Okay, those are some good answers. Yeah, one thing for sure is that it would be more widespread by then. It would have spread into more of the plants instead of so isolated. But the other thing that's really important here is that you don't see defoliation. If that were boxwood blight, you would see especially those lower inner leaves dropping off and not hanging onto the plant like this once they were infected. So this one was probably Phytophthora nicotiana, which is our #1 species of Phytophthora that we see on boxwoods. The leyland, I don't remember. I'd have to look it up and see if we knew, but there's another species which is called Phytophthora cinnamomi, which is very common in our woody landscape plants, in some of the conifers, and in Azalea and rhododendron. Not sure which one it would have been in the raspberry there, but the important thing to realize is that there are multiple species of Phytophthora. Even though they're very similar in their biology, they're not exactly the same. I'm going to try something I don't think I have before, and if it crashes everybody's computer, then I'll say have a good afternoon, and we'll see you later. But I'm going to see if I can load a video. So if you see the multimedia box pop up on your screen and ask if you want to play it, then go ahead and say yes to that. On my side here, it's showing 69-74%. That means it's going out to all of you, 97, and complete. So I won't have a way of knowing at my end if you're able to see this, but if you could check on that then and try and play it. What you will see, nope, you're not seeing it? Oh well.
I don't see it either, Mike.
Let me try if I can play it from this side. Oh, here we go.
I think there it is. Let's see.
Those of you who have Macs may not be able to see this. I'm not sure. What you're seeing, like, hopefully by now you can see things like snowflakes that are floating both up and down. Those are actually the zoospores, or the swimming spores of the Phytophthora. That was not exactly natural speed, but about twice as fast as they were actually swimming. So that's one of the real characteristics of Phytophthora, is that it's producing swimming spores, and that gives us a clue that when you're thinking about managing Phytophthora in your landscape, the main thing, one of the main things you want to do is concentrate on reducing excess water. I'll talk about that again in a minute. Let me go back though first, because I see there were some questions that got swept by. Let's see. Can Phytophthora affect only part of the boxwood versus the whole plant? It could, yes. You could have, let's say, one side of the root system that is compromised, and then that side of the plant is where you're seeing the symptoms. So that could happen. It will not, though, affect the foliage directly or the stems directly on boxwood. So hopefully that, how does this affect stems? Do they split open? No, if you see bark splitting, that would be more of an indication of cold injury. And again, you can be seeing, I think I may have mentioned this last time, you can be seeing plants decline in hot weather because they were damaged by cold back in the spring or even the previous fall, and then because they're unable to transpire enough water during the high demand of the hot weather, that you start seeing the general decline in the heat rather than the cold. So that would be what you would see with, if you're seeing stem splitting, that would be something to think about. Let's see, I think there was another question in there. Put it this way, if I didn't answer your question, I know there was one that got missed, then feel free to ask it again when we get a little further. Here would be a classic example of a situation where people like to plant these screens. Often it's leyland cypress that's used, and when we have Phytophthora problems, they're often starting at the low end, where the highest soil water content is found. Another picture from Sean Banks in Johnson County. And here's a picture from Kelly Ivers, who used to be in our department, of a shrub, an azalea that had Phytophthora root rot. So you can see small leaves, poor growth, defoliation, the lichens growing on the stems because the plant is unthrifty. But that's just a background here to this particular publication, which should be probably required reading across the counties. I'm going to type it in there to the now it ran off the edge, so hopefully that came through okay. Yeah, I think that would be it. This publication was developed several years ago out of a working group at our ornamentals workshop, where we sat down and from several different states, quite a few states, sitting together and saying, all right, what seems to work in areas that have Phytophthora? And so we developed 3 lists, one of woody plants, trees and shrubs, one of bedding plants, annuals, and one of herbaceous perennials that have fewer problems with Phytophthora root rot. These are not going to be bulletproof, especially if you have high disease pressure. You could still get problems with Phytophthora, but they're a place to start. Also, at the beginning of that publication, there's a set of cultural practices that are recommended for areas that have had Phytophthora diagnosed. This is something that you would, by the way, when you're talking about Phytophthora root rot, want to get a laboratory confirmation, because whether it's there or not is going to determine what you can put in that spot later. Versus, let's say, if you had armillaria root rot. One other area I want to mention before talking about management, though, is it sounds like an old monster movie, Phytophthora versus Lycopersicum. It turns out that we are very seldom getting samples of home garden tomatoes. Now, that's not my area. I don't do the vegetable diagnoses, but I go into the database and check these things before preparing the PPP when I'm going to talk about it. So it turns out that there are only a very few diagnoses that we've done of Phytophthora on tomatoes in home gardens. And I'm going to ask for your opinion on that in a minute. But from our standpoint, it's not very common. We can get a root and lower stem rot, Phytophthora nicotianae, Phytophthora capsicii, and others. There's, of course, late blight, which we see quite often in the commercial tomato production areas in the mountains. And then there's something called buckeye rot, and I'll show you a photo of that at the end here. This is a picture from Aguascalientes in Mexico. When I worked there, it was sort of a in-ground greenhouse production system, and the tomatoes really got hammered with late blight. You can see again, notice how this is a little bit similar to the annual vinca symptom with the grayish-green diffuse leaf blotch, and if the conditions are humid enough and you put a hand lens to it, you may be able to see some of the sporulation, actually the sporangia that are being produced here. And late blight sporangia will be windborne, whereas the others would be, of course, there's the zoospores that can move in the soil water, and anything can move with soil itself, but the splash dispersion of some of our other aerial Phytophthora is really important. I'll mention in a minute. But with late blight, yeah, you get these things blowing around in the wind currents, and so that under the right conditions you can have very rapid outbreaks. And here is an example of what the infection looks like on tomato fruit. Late blight has been present in the mountains since late June anyway here. I'm not sure what the current status of it is. I think Matt may have mentioned before I was able to log in that I just got back from vacation this morning, and I'm a little bit out of the loop on some things. But I want to ask your opinion. Since we only know what comes to the clinic, I don't know if it's because they're getting screened out at the county level or if it's really that uncommon. So I'm going to leave our A, B, C, D polling options and ask if you see late blight on tomato in the home garden. And I decided to break it up this way. So if you see it several times a year, please select A, about once a year, B, C, if it's once every several years, and D, never. And again, if you would use the polling option that's under your name in the participant list, it should have a letter A in a box. And if you click on that, it'll give you the choices if you want to call it A, B, C, or D. All right, Debbie says in a community garden, okay. All right, let's see. We published this to the whiteboard. Okay. So, the ones who replied, a total of about 20 folks who replied, seems to be that there is a good bit of it out there in the home gardens. You're seeing it several times a year to about once a year, most folks, at least those who replied. So that is actually interesting to me because, like I said, we don't have an insight into what's happening necessarily out in the counties if you're already diagnosing it. Now let me talk a little bit about the control aspect of things, going backwards from the first tomato late blight. If you want more information on this, there's the link at the bottom. I'll try and type it in here as well. 1 second. Oops. All right, there you go. So planting early to try and get your plants up and running and producing as soon as possible. Growing resistant cultivars, if that is available, if you can find them. Culling diseased plants and weeds is going to be an important strategy to keep what we call the inoculum down, and minimizing leaf wetness, again, because of the importance of water and the life cycle of Phytophthora. And for the home gardener, there's really not much that can be done other than, as far as fungicides, other than weekly preventive applications of chlorothalonil or copper-based fungicides, which are both protectants. The commercial operators have quite a few more choices than the home owner does, and unfortunately the ones available to us home growers are not going to be that effective. The silver lining for at least the Piedmont and Coastal Plain is that this is something that you are unlikely to see in those areas. One other thing I want to mention, a fruit symptom for the Phytophthora nicotiana is very similar to, there's supposed to be some differences, but I'm not sure that that's that reliable. I'd almost go better with what your foliage looks like as to whether you have a clue that your fruit rot is going to be Phytophthora nicotiana, aka buckeye rot, or late blight. And this one is caused when soil is splashed up on the fruits and the Phytophthora infects that way. Gina, I do not know anything about hydrogen peroxide or baking soda. Well, baking soda I really don't think would be of much value. I know that does have some value, or the potassium bicarbonate in terms of powdery mildews, and farther north in the country, black spot possibly even. But hydrogen peroxide, again, there are some commercial things, commercial pest control products based on hydrogen peroxide, but I don't think that going to the medicine cabinet and grabbing hydrogen peroxide and spraying is probably going to be of that much use, although I have to say I haven't seen any studies on that. Brand name for chlorothalonil, there are many now brand names for chlorothalonil. The most traditional one is Daconil, but there are a lot now since it's off patent, it's been around. This is one you're probably more likely to see, and in places where you wouldn't see late blight, you could see the septoria leaf spot on tomato, quite common. And another one that you might confuse for late blight would be gray leaf spot of tomato, or stem phyllium. So do be aware that there's some things that could possibly be mistaken for late blight. Oh, I guess I didn't put a slide in. apologize, I meant to do that for the Phytophthora management, and starting with the Catharanthus on the annual vincas. The things to do there are going to be, one helpful point would be to put mulch down on the soil that would prevent splashing of infested soil onto foliage where infection could occur. And of course, again, trying to keep excess water down. And Mark's presentation was really helpful, I thought, in that regard when they talked about, or he talked about what they do at the Arboretum in terms of incorporating large amounts of organic matter and raising the level of the soil in the bed to above grade so that it drains well. There were some studies that Dr. Mike Benson, now retired of this department, had done showing that even when they put Phytophthora into the soil intentionally, you can get a tremendous reduction in the loss of azaleas to Phytophthora root rot by doing the combination of incorporating organic matter and raising the level of the beds to improve drainage. So those are your two big strategies for dealing with this organism. And then, again, for the aerial blight phases, using mulch so that water splash does not move soil directly onto foliage or fruits. Quickly on our bolos, I see we're just out of time. There are a few things to still be looking for late in the season now. Phytophthora diseases, as we've been talking about, root knot nematode, powdery mildew will be at its greatest extent. There's some rust that will start to be more prevalent now in the fall. Secondary leaf spots as the plant leaves, especially our deciduous trees, start to senesce. And nutritional disorders as fertilizer kind of gets run out at the end of the year. On our trees and shrubs, we've got bacterial leaf scorch symptoms since midsummer, Entomosporium leaf spot, of course, on Photinia, red-tip Photinia if there's any left, and on Indian hawthorn. Boxwood blight, always keep your eyes and, I was going to say ears, but that probably wouldn't help much, open for boxwood blight and the shot hole that we get on prunus species. Dryadius root and butt rot, if you look at the picture here in the upper right. Let's see, excuse me one second. This here shows a fresh fruiting body of Pseudoinonotus dryadius at the buttress roots. Here's the buttress root of an oak tree, and those will be starting to develop their new fruiting bodies as we get into the fall. And Cercospora leaf spot, pretty ubiquitous on hydrangea. And the veggies, again, septoria leaf spot and gray leaf spot, possibly bacterial leaf spot on the tomatoes. And then black rot as we start getting the transplant time for the broccoli, the cabbage, the collards. Make sure that you're inspecting your transplants and that you're not bringing in black rot or other diseases on those. Bitter rot and other rots of apple, sooty blotch and fly speck of apple, of course, and Pierce's disease of grape, which is Xylella fastidiosa bacterial vascular disease. On turf, we could be seeing large patch on the warm season turf as things get cooler. Remember, the rule of thumb is that when the turf is stressed, you get more disease. So disease on warm season turf during cool weather and on cool season turf during warm weather. Could still see some brown patch out there if there's enough moisture. Leaf spot and Pythian blight on Bermuda grass, gray leaf spot on tall fescue, and perennial ryegrass, I believe the PR stands for, and St. Augustine. And of course, fairy ring, any turf, anytime. Debbie, what's the publication name? That publication, I'm not sure which one you're asking about there. All right, Debbie, if you're still there. Okay. I guess I'm not what you're showing us now. I guess I'm still not understanding the question. Not a publication name. The one that I mentioned earlier was a course about the, it's called, we call it Phytophthora replacement plants for short. The BOLO, yes. This is not a publication, right. Thank you, Lisa, for clarifying that. This is the slide for the end of, at the end of our presentations, Matt and I each do what we call a BOLO, or be on the lookout. A little term we borrowed from the government there. Can we get this slide? Yes, I can certainly. Actually, I think what we'll do, because Lucy's not on the program today, but usually I think she makes these things available to the counties afterwards. So I would say let me touch base with Lucy and figure out how we can make that happen. All right, any other questions? See, we're a little bit over time here, but most folks stuck it out, so thank you for that. And turn it back over to our interim, temporary, I'm sure he hopes temporary, moderator.
We'll see. All right, well, thanks, Mike, again. You're now welcome to take a break and hopefully don't fall asleep. I know you got home late last night after viewing the eclipse yesterday. Hope everybody enjoyed the eclipse yesterday. And just a couple announcements. I hope I get these right. The next session will be on October 24th. We'll have Rob Trickle with the NC Forest Service speaking about forest pests. We'll see you then for that, hopefully. The Horticultural Science Online is offering a non-credit courses. This is a 6-week online course provided by NC State and Longwood Gardens. So check that out. I'm sure Lucy would have more answers about what's going on. So please email her or contact her if you have any questions. Where's the list of all upcoming sessions? Well, we have the next session October 24th, and like I said, Rob Trickle will be the person speaking, but we don't come up with the next year's session calendar until next year around. So early next year, we'll publish the dates for the PPP for all of next year, but they are typically February, April, June, August, and October. The last Tuesday of those months. We have had a little bit of scheduling differences this year because of different conflicts, but we hope to get that schedule for next year up around January or so. Okay. The hard copy of the Master Garden Extension Handbook will be available soon. I actually have been working on editing some of the chapters for this, so soon enough, a very up-to-date and hard copy version will be available. Make sure to go to the links shown here. Let's see, volunteer program guidelines. Lucy made these announcements, so I'm not sure exactly what this is, but basically, if you follow that link, this will tell you something about the Extension Master Gardener Volunteer Program and the regulations and such. See, Collard Greens and Common Ground, North Carolina Community Food Gardening Handbook is coming soon to the UNC Press. There are no new guidelines for the Extension Master Gardener volunteer logos. Actually, this has been a whole rebranding for the Cooperative Extension Service in North Carolina at NC State and NC A&T. So there are specific logos and specific types of branding used for certain types of presentations and products out there. So keep in mind these things when you're making talks and whatnot. First ever North Carolina EMGV College 2017. That was this is just a recap. There were 122 participants, 5 pre-conference workshops, which included one of ours. Mike and I gave a workshop and a nice walking tour of the campus. 12 tours, 33 concurrent sessions, and keynote speakers included Bryce Lane, Elsa Youngstead, Mary Jack Brennan, and Jim Semple. and the next one looks like it's going to be in 2019. If you want to subscribe to the NC State EMGV listserv, go to this web address right here and do so. If you have any questions, again, please talk to Lucy Bradley or let us know and we'll get you to the right people.
Matt, let me just mention something. Some people I know have signed off, but my boss suggested, Barbara Shu suggested that we could make our bolos into PDFs and put it on the Facebook page. Since I don't book Face, but I could pass it to you to post there.
Of course, yeah, that'd be great. I got to add a few things anyway, so I'll start adding some things to Facebook, and please follow our Facebook page. Obviously on Facebook, the PDIC Facebook page. Just search PDIC or Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. I'll be updating some things, and I'll be sure to add some things that Mike passed along to me too. Need any clothing? Here's some clothing. And let's see. The Costa Rica trip, February 22nd to March 1st, 2018. This is an Extension Master Gardener International Study Program. So again, please visit that website, the EMGV-Costa-Rica on the ncsu.edu Go website. Here's some more information about that. I'm sure you can find that at the website as well. I don't know a lot about this, so I'm just going to briefly go through these, or at least show them. Okay, and that's it for our session. So if you will, we'll just exit out. We'll have this recording up when Lucy can get it up onto the website, and you can go back and review what we said today. And please, of course, always let us know if you have any questions or comments through email or other methods, and we will see you in October. All right, thanks everyone, and we'll talk to you next time.